Thanks for watching. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel.
Hello, this is Shiley from Sheepishly Made, and today I'm going to show you how to needle felt a mushroom and put together a cute little woodsy scene. So let's start with talking about the supplies you need for this project. So first of all, for the mushroom stem, I use a 14 gauge craft wire, and this one is cut to 5 inches, and then 1.5 inches is bent there. So this will become the stem of the mushroom, and this will help to secure the mushroom to our little scene. You also need, for the wire, I recommend using Sarafina's Tacky wrap. It's a little bun and it's sticky. It's actually made out of beeswax, and we put this on the wire to help the wool grab onto the wire. And that will be the method I'll be showing you today to wrap the wool around your wire. You also need a wood craft disc. So these are actual slices of wood, and then some rocks. I've got a few out here and more in my little jar here. And I also use a little bit of moss. And all this stuff I just buy at local craft stores. You can order it online. If you're using one of my kits, all the supplies is already included in your kit. And your wire already has the tacky substance on it. For wool today, we'll be using this wool right here. So this is all wool roving. This is the core wool, and there is at most a 1/2 ounce here. I'll be showing you 2 different mushroom methods of making different shapes. So we'll be using probably all of this between the 2 mushrooms. And then I have a little bit of a light tannish silver color, a little bit of this orange yellow for the mushroom top, and a little bit of white. And that's all the wool you need. Now for other basic supplies, for the actual felting, you'll need some felting needles. I'm going to be using a 40 spiral and a 36 triangle. And then I'll also be using my multi-needle tool, which has 40 spiral needles in it. And this I call my smoother tool, so it helps smooth out surfaces and increase my felting speed in certain areas. You also need a felting mat. I use my wool felting mat, but you can use any sort of felting mat you like to use. And finally, you need a glue gun and some hot glue sticks. So we'll be using the glue gun and hot glue sticks to assemble our final project. So let's get started.
Starting with our stem, we have our wire that is 5 inches long and bent for 1.5 inches. And we're going to coat it in the Sarafina's Tacky wrap. If you have my kit, yours is already pre-coated, so you can just get started with wrapping the wool around. So to coat it, I just pull the wire across the little sticky bun and twist it so I can coat that whole wire with this tacky beeswax substance, which allows the wool to grab right onto that wire. I want to make sure it's nice and coated. Then we can grab our light tannish wool and pull it into some nice thin strips. And the way I'm going to wrap this, so whichever is the dominant hand will be holding the wire at the bend. Then with the other hand, which is my left hand, I'm going to be pinching that wool onto the wire and keeping it nice and tight so it goes on really smooth and really thin at first. So you can see with my left hand, I'm pinching the wire and the wool is coming up underneath, and right between my fingers, it's wrapping onto that wire. And I'm twisting with my right hand, always twisting in the same direction. Once you start twisting in one direction, you don't want to twist in the opposite because the wool will unravel. Once you get to the end, you can wrap back the other way. I always start at the bend, go to the end, and then come back. The bend of the wire will help us attach our mushroom to our little wood disc at the end. And once you run out of the one strip, then you just add another. And see, I'm keeping it really thin so I can get this nice tight wrap. Wrapping wool tightly on the stem will help you do less felting later on and make sure the stem is nice and smooth and even. So I'm going to keep wrapping this wool along the stem. And I like to wrap the wool until it's about pencil thick. And then instead of pinching and turning the wire, you can start wrapping just right around, still using thin pieces and wrapping nice and even so you don't have too many lumps and bumps. If you have any lumps and bumps, you can work them out with felting. You just want to try to keep it as even as possible, and down the road that'll lead to less felting. Now this is a great time when your stem is about pencil thick to secure the ends. And I do that by taking my needle, I'm using a 36 triangle, and poking in parallel with the wire, pretty much right next to the wire, and just poking the end of that wool so it's secure on both ends and doesn't want to fall off the end or try to go around the bend of the wire. And I'm going to continue just wrapping this up. Now, these mushroom stems generally are from a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch thick. If your wool seems to be getting a little loose, you can always take a break and poke it with your needle a little bit along the length of that stem. You just want to make sure you watch the wire and you're poking slow and careful, getting to feel where that wire is so you don't bend your needle too much. And I'll just go back and forth along the length of the stem and poke that wool to make sure it's nice and secure. Your stem should really be fairly dense from wrapping that wool very tightly. It shouldn't be very squishy. And I'm going to continue wrapping the wool and felting a little bit where needed until I'm happy with the thickness of my stem. All right, so let's slow back down here so you can see a little bit more up close how I'm felting this stem. You want to make sure you felt the ends so they're fairly secure. The top of the stem is going to be mostly hidden by the mushroom top. It's going to be up underneath the mushroom top, so you won't see it too much. But I'm going to just work my way. I like to work across the length of the stem, up and down, and slowly roll that so I can get on all sides. Now, since the mushroom stem is fairly thin, you don't need to poke your needle in too far, just a little bit into the surface. You want to aim for like the middle of that stem. You don't want to poke your needle all the way through the stem, or you're going to have little fuzzies coming out the other side. Now just watch the wire, of course, because that can bend your needle. If you hit it really hard and bend your needle, it may break as well. It happens from time to time. But you want to make sure you're poking hard enough too that you're leaving the little indentations in the wool. If you're not seeing indentations, you're definitely not poking your needle in far enough. So in here, I'm just checking to see how happy I am with it. You want it to be nice and dense. And that's what it looks like when you're done. Now for the first mushroom top, we're going to do the flat one first. You want a 12 to 14 inch piece of roving, about 2.5 to 3 inches wide. And you're going to fold it up into a square shape. So you want to make your fold as long as they are wide. And it should look about something like this when you get it folded up. And we're going to start with our felting needle, 36 triangle, just poking in the middle at first just to secure that end and to get it to flatten out just slightly. We're going to poke, poke, poke just in the center right now. Our goal is to make a little dish shape. Now to round out those corners, you're going to stand it on end and felt into the side of your little shape here and focus mostly on those corners of like the square that you folded up, because you want this to be a round shape. As for your flatter mushroom top, we'll do the more round mushroom top later in the video so you know how to do both. And I'm just going to focus on poking in on those corners, turn to the next corner and just poke along there. And we'll continue to do all 4 corners. And these are going to transform into like the edge of your mushroom top. So you can see there when I put it back flat, it's much more round shape. And I'm going to be switching to my multi-needle tool. So this one holds 3 36 triangles. I don't have these on my website, but you can get them on Amazon. I always change out the needles to ones that I know I like. And I'm going to focus in the center of this first. So you want to poke directly in the center for a little bit to get the dish shape started, or a bowl shape. And this is going to be the underside of our mushroom. So once you've felt it in the middle for a little while, then we can work on the edges. So I'm holding up that mushroom top kind of on an angle on its side, and then working from the middle to the edge of the mushroom, back to the middle, and back to the edge, and I'm going to work that all the way around. Now the reason I hold it up on the angle like this is because that helps make that dish shape. So it dishes out the middle, making the center a little bit deeper, and then the edges go over like an umbrella. And this is the underside of the mushroom we're working on. But once you've felted all the way around and done the underside, then we can flip it over. This is the top of the mushroom we're looking at, and I'm felting along the edges. If you don't have a multi-needle tool, you can just use a single needle, preferably a 36 triangle or something similar, and do the same things I'm doing. It's just going to take you longer. So I'm poking all the way around, and I'm working just mostly towards the edge, and this is just to help smooth out the top of the mushroom. You're going to have to felt both sides, but we want to maintain that bowl umbrella shape of the mushroom top. So I switch back and forth a lot between felting on the underside and felting on the top. Felting more aggressively on the bottom, and then felting more lightly on the top so I don't change that shape of it too much. This is my smoother tool, as I call it. It holds a bunch of 40 spiral needles. This is a little bit more gentle, and I'm using it to felt the wool on the top of the mushroom. I like to hold the mushroom top with my hands so it doesn't like try to flatten out as I'm felting the top. The more you felt it, the more dense it will get, and the easier it will retain its shape. You just want to keep an eye on that and constantly check, make sure you're retaining the shape and not turning it into a flat piece. And just as a reminder, you can always use a single needle instead of the multi-needle tools. It's just much faster with my multi-needle tools. But you can use a 36 triangle needle or something similar for everything I'm doing at the moment. So now this is one of my favorite techniques for making a nice, firm, smooth edge. So anything that has thin edges, I pinch the edge between my fingers and poke in that edge with my needle. So I'm kind of poking in parallel to the object instead of perpendicular, and poking right in that edge. And I keep my fingers right up close to the edge and just poke slowly in between my fingers, because this is a finger poker here. And I'll do this all the way around the edge of the mushroom to clean it up. Now, to finish your mushroom top before we add the color, you continue to use all the techniques I have talked about, and you want to just have a nice smooth surface. You don't want any fluffy wool. You want it to be nice and poked all over, but maintain that bowl shape. So flip it over so you're felting on the underneath and felting back and forth from the edge to the middle, holding it on an angle. So you get that bowl shape, that umbrella shape that we look for the flatter mushroom top. And make sure you felt over the entire top surface, just felt a little bit more gently. And once you have a nice mushroom top, we'll add some color. Now to start adding color, we're going to take small thin pieces of our yellow color. And I take real thin pieces and then fold them in half to start with the edges. So for the mushroom top, when you look at it from the side, you won't be able to see the yellow, but you don't necessarily want to see the underneath color. So I like to start this almost on the very bottom edge and poke along there first. That way you're securing that yellow color to that edge, and when you start working on the top part of the color, then it won't pull back from that edge as much. So I generally like to start with the edges of the mushroom and then fill in the top, trying to keep the wool fibers kind of going in the same direction so you don't get any directional looking fibers on the top of the mushroom. So once I secured the edge, then I'm going to fill over the rest of that piece I have along the top. And I felt down each piece before I add another. So I'm going to do the same thing, take a thin piece, fold it in half, put it on the edge, and repeat the process. And I always start with a single needle. If I'm using the single needle to start adding color, I'll use a 36 triangle. And when I'm done adding color, I'll smooth it all out with my multi-needle tool that holds the 40 spiral needles. And I do have those ones available on my website for purchase. And that's the blue tool. That's the one I call my smoother. So I'm putting more wool along the edge and felting that edge all the way around, felting each piece down. And now I'm adding color over the middle to fill in all the white space. I'm using just enough wool to cover up that white, not using an overabundance of wool. And I'll be using that single needle, which is my 36 triangle, to start tacking down everything, and then using my multi-needle tool with the 40 spirals to smooth everything down. You can switch to a single finer needle like a spiral to finish out if you don't have a multi-needle tool. And once you have a nice smooth mushroom top, we can add some warts to the mushroom top. So you can either use white, you can use a tan. Sometimes I blend the two, and that's what I'm doing here, blending the two colors together. And then I'm going to start taking small little pieces, kind of balling them up between my fingers, rolling them around, putting them down, and then just felting them on kind of gently. I like to leave them a little bit raised so you don't have to poke them too hard. And just put them on your mushroom in any place, kind of just randomly. You can look up pictures of yellow blusher mushrooms to kind of see what they look like and how many warts you want to add. Some don't have very many. It just depends on the mushroom. Every mushroom is different. Now that we made the flat mushroom top, we will make the more rounded one. I'm taking my long piece of roving again, and this time I'm going to fold it in half though to make it a little bit shorter. We're going to wrap that as tight as we can. I wrap the sides in, fold them in as I go so the ends aren't too fluffy. Just a little fluffy bits. You can see me rolling those in with my fingers. And just rolling this up really tight, folding the ends in. You want to roll it up as tight as possible so it's not super, super squishy. That'll make you have to do more felting. And I never take my hands off of it, keeping it held together the whole time. And first I'm going to poke that tail, the end of the roving in with my needle. That way it doesn't unravel. And then I'm going to start at the top and kind of focus in the middle and then going out to the edges slowly. The top is rounded, so you want to keep that in mind as you're felting. You're pushing the wool where it's going to go. So on the edges of the top, you want to felt kind of at an angle, and then right in the middle of the top, you felt straight up and down. I'll show you more of that here in a moment. But pretty much you're going to do the same thing as the other mushroom top, but you don't worry about the shape near as much. It doesn't take as much felting. This one's actually a little bit easier in my opinion. But you're going to felt over the entire surface of this mushroom. The sides are pretty straightforward. The top and the bottom, you want to listen to the techniques to get the right shape going. So that's what it's looking like so far. Now this is the technique for the top. To get that rounded edge, you can see at the very middle, I'm felting straight up and down. And then as I go out to the edge, the angle of my needle changes all the way down to the sides. And just make sure to turn that and do that consistently over the top of the mushroom. If you have any parts that are more bumpy, poking out more than others, then focus your needle in that area. Now for the very bottom, you want to focus in the middle first. So we're going to kind of use the same idea as the other mushroom top, that you want to dish out the bottom of the mushroom. So if you start in the very center first and hollow that out a little bit, then your edges will be a little bit raised. So when your mushroom is right side up, your stem will go into the hollow of that mushroom. So I work in the middle and then slowly work my way out to the edges, making sure that the middle is always a little bit deeper than the edges. So I go back and forth between using my multi-needle tool and a single needle, but you can always use a single needle for this whole project. I use a 36 triangle for almost everything. This project, you don't necessarily need a spiral needle. Spiral needles are great for smoothing out surfaces, and that's why they're in my multi-needle tool, the blue one. The pink one holds the triangles for faster felting like I'm doing here. So I worked on the bottom quite a bit, and then I'm working on the sides. Just keep going back and forth, checking my shape to make sure I'm retaining my shape and moving in the direction that I want the mushroom top to go. So I left my mushroom top this size just for the purposes of making the video, but if you wanted to make your mushroom top larger than this, you're more than welcome to, and you can just add a little bit more roving at a time, just wrapping it around that middle. And before I finish this top, I'm going over the whole thing with my multi-needle tool, my smoothing tool, to get a nice smooth finish so we can add color to the mushroom. So for the color, we're using the same yellow color. This one I start on the top of the mushroom and felt that on. This mushroom top is really nice and dense, so it's easy to use my multi-needle tool, and I'm not working in like a small detailed area. So I can do the top first and then wrap around the sides of the mushroom. Just adding a little bit at a time, just enough color to cover up the white underneath. I'll take a little bit longer piece, still fairly thin, and this I'll use to wrap around the sides of the mushroom. And keeping that fiber going in the same direction. And that will kind of blend with the top of the mushroom. When you do more round objects, it's harder to keep the fibers going in the same direction. And depending on the wool that you use, some wool can show the fiber direction more than others. The wool I'm using, the wool in my kits, it doesn't show as much of the individual fiber directions, but I also use techniques to avoid that. So keep adding color until you've covered up all your white besides the underneath of your mushroom. And you can use kind of the same technique on the edge of the mushroom, the bottom edge, to make sure you're getting close to that edge. I just wrap around instead of folding in half. After you have your nice smooth surface, then we can add warts like we did with the first mushroom top, which is pretty much the same exact idea, adding the warts as you like to. Now with both the tops done, we can attach the stems to the tops. So take that stem and put it right in the middle of the mushroom top, holding it upside down. Use your felting mat. Make sure you put pressure down on that stem. And we're going to take the needle and poke at an angle through the stem closest to the mushroom top and into that mushroom top. You want to make sure you poke both the stem and the top so the fibers will combine together. Now, since you've already felted both pieces, this takes a little bit longer to felt together than felting just loose wool. So you want to make sure you go all the way around the base of that stem, keep turning it, and you want to be able to tug on that stem and it not pull off. And I'm talking a good little light tug, not like with all your strength, but if it's not secure enough, it can fall off over time. So you want to poke all the way around. You don't need to poke super, super deep, but make sure you're going into that mushroom top pretty good. Now, since this is a flatter piece, a lot of times you'll poke through the top and leave little fluffy white pieces coming through. So you can poke those back in. You can't see it as much on this video, but I'm sure you'll see it on your mushroom top. So just poke those back in and smooth out the top a little bit. And you have a nice little mushroom. So let's do the smaller mushroom, then we can assemble our little scenes. So same thing, this mushroom stem's a little bit smaller. I had this one left over from another mushroom project. And we're going to do the same thing. Now this one you can actually poke in farther into the top. You don't necessarily have to, but since the mushroom top is deeper than the flat one, it's not going to poke out the other side. But you're going to do the same thing, poke all the way around the base of that stem into the mushroom top to secure it nice and tight. And when you tug on it, it doesn't come off. So to assemble our little scenes, I have all the supplies laid out here, some newspaper to catch all the little bits of moss so it doesn't go over my work surface. So the first thing I do is take the mushroom and put it where I want it on the wood disc. You can see that bend is there. You're going to glob a bunch of glue, the hot glue, all over that bended wire. So depending on how hot the glue gets on your glue gun, you might have to hold it longer so it stays in place, but you want to hold that mushroom on for a little bit. So I put a bunch of glue over the wire around the base of the stem and then over the middle of that wood disc so then I can add some moss. And I put the moss right over the glue. And again, if you have a really hot glue gun, this one's not as hot, but some of my other ones are hotter. You might want to watch your fingers, use something else to push things onto your disc so you don't burn your fingers on the glue. I've done it many times. So you can see I put a chunk of moss over top of the glue that I already put on to cover up that glue. I use a generous amount. You're better to use more than not. And then you can design your little scene here, add some rocks, put a little glue on the bottom of the rock, and then put it on. I like to put the rocks on the wood instead of on the moss because the moss does break apart. So if you put it just like on the moss, it can just fall off. So I like to put them mostly on the wood. If I put it on the moss, I like to put a lot of glue on there so it goes through the whole moss piece. And then you'll have to pull off your little glue strings as it dries. So there is one of the mushrooms. And then I'm going to do the next one, again putting a bunch of glue over where that bended part of the wire is. And then designing the rest of this by adding some moss, more glue, lots of glue. You're going to hide it with all your moss and rocks. You can also use bigger pieces of wood, make a fancier little scene. These are just simple and easy for these small projects and kits, and to be able to show you an easy way to make a cute little scene that you can actually display and looks really beautiful. So here are our two little mushrooms. I've also done one where I did a bigger wood disc and did 3 mushrooms together. They're about 5 inches tall. But thanks for watching and felting along with me today. Make sure to subscribe to my channel. Happy felting!